This is They Create Worlds, episode 237, Jordan Mechner and Prince of Persia.
If anybody wants to find me, I'll be in the last place you would look. In a place where people used to be, a land that's called reality, you'll find me there.
Welcome to They Create Worlds. I'm Jeffrey, and I'm joined by my co-host, Alex.
Hello.
We have done it, Alex. We have gotten through all of the many fights through Karateka, defeated them all, got to the princess. So there's nothing more to talk about except for... There's something that's come up on the screen, Alex.
Oh?
It's large. It's menacing. It's an entire palace full of traps and doom. It's like a boss level. There's a princess going into it. Oh, dear. I guess we're going to have to go into a large Persian dungeon and save another princess.
Indeed, that's right. After looking at the beginning of Jordan Mechner's career, noted game designer, last time, we are doing our part 2 on Mr. Mechner, where we do a deep dive into the Prince of Persia. Obviously, his career does not end there. Right now, we are not going to talk about his later games. We may at some point. He has released journals in book form of his work during the time of Karateka and Prince of Persia. He's also on the web released some of his journals from his other notable pre-Ubisoft game, The Last Express, which definitely makes that worth exploring sometime. But right now, we just want to keep it to 2. We don't want to do more than that on this subject. But with those journals to dive into, we want to take a really deep dive into the creation of the Prince of Persia, and not just the specifics of the creation of the game, because it's really not that complicated, but also discuss what's going on with Jordan Mechner and what's going on with the video game industry at this time and the computer game industry at this time. Because as we talked about to close out the last episode, he had the idea for Prince of Persia immediately after finishing Karateka in 1985, and yet the game would not release until 1989. A lot happens in there, both with Mr. Mechner personally and with the industry that we're going to discuss in this episode.
But before we delve into the land of traps and doom, Alex and I will soon be on a trip to the wonderful state of Georgia and some sort of Dragon Con at the end of August, beginning of September.
That's right, in what has become an annual tradition, and will continue to be so as long as I can con Jeff into coming and con the convention into having us. We will be presenting a talk at Dragon Con, my home convention that is near and dear to my heart here in Atlanta, Georgia. As always, don't know the time yet, won't know the time until much closer, date or time, but it'll be sometime within that April 28th to September 1st, or whatever the heck it is that Dragon Con is taking place over Labor Day weekend this year. Special 40th anniversary this year, that being the arrival of the Nintendo Entertainment System in North America through a limited test release in the New York City area. We already did a very special Christmas episode about that on the podcast, but it also just seemed like the best topic to do for the con as well, commemorating that 40th anniversary. If you're coming to the con and you have some free time, stop on by, see us in person. We'll probably have stickers.
I'll try to have stickers.
Yeah, stickers and, knowledge. Stickers and knowledge. That's what we'll bring.
Alex does all the knowledge. He just goes to the information desk and just constantly goes, "Hail, knowledge, in your face."
That's right. I know everything that's going on at the con. Everything. It's not quite true. I haven't memorized the schedule, but I know where it's happening. Let's put it that way.
I go there, I'm just like a lost puppy, and I just go, "Alex, how do I get to X?" And he's like, "Follow me." And he just power walks, and I'm just like lumbering after him going, "Ah!"
Indeed.
Interestingly enough, this also coincides with our 10-year anniversary of They Create Worlds. 10 horrible years of us talking into microphones.
That's right. 10 years of 2 episodes a month every month. So I guess that means, if I can vaguely math, the 240th episode of the show will be our 10th anniversary. We have some good ideas, had some consultation with some people, including Ethan Johnson, friend of the show, but don't know quite what the episode's going to be yet, but it is definitely going to be a 10 years of something retrospective, which just makes sense. We are celebrating 10 years, so we are going to look back over 10 years of some topic in video game history to be determined. Not only that, but right after we celebrate that 10th anniversary, no rest for the wicked, especially those of us that do 2 episodes a month every month without fail for 10 years, we will be holding our annual live stream big 3-parter extravaganza. In that episode, or series of episodes, we will be discussing the grand sweep of the history of Commodore from its start as a typewriter importer in Canada in the 1950s, through its calculator days, its home computer days, the Commodore 64, the Commodore Amiga, until its eventual bankruptcy at the beginning of the 1990s.
And to celebrate that 10-year anniversary, I don't know, send us in some of your favorite memories from the last 10 years, some funny moments of something Alex has said, something funny I've said, something you just learned and you were like, hey, that's cool.
Yeah, why not? We did that for our 200th episode extravaganza, I believe. But we can do a few more for 10 years. It's always nice to know there's people out there listening. We'll never be a mainstream major hit podcast, but the support of you, the listeners, certainly keeps us going in our little niche.
I guess there's enough dilly-daddling here outside of this Palace of Doom.
Sure.
Why would they put so many traps in a palace like this? The poor servants. You must go through so many servants.
They're in the dungeons. You know, I don't think the servants tend to go into the dungeons.
Someone's got to mop up the blood.
I suppose. It could be worse, though. Could be Loot Go Lane after Duriel made an appearance. Diablo 2 fans out there know what I'm talking about.
Oh, dear. Jordan Mechner made Karateka. He got some inspiration and was like, you know, I want to make something vaguely Indiana Jones-ish. I want to make it this puzzly, explory thing. Hasn't quite sorted out the theme, but he has a lot of the elements there. He has a lot of the stuff he wants to incorporate. He just has not really come down to, you know, I want to set it in the Middle East. I want it set in Persia, something around that thing, and go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of start where we left off, and I realize we touched on this at the end of the last episode as well. After Karateka was done, Jordan Mechner was really at a bit of a crossroads. Creating that game had basically taken the entirety of his college career. We may recall that at the beginning of the last episode, we talked about the troubles he was having finishing some of his previous games to Karateka, while also trying to finish his freshman year at Yale and, in fact, nearly flunking out. Now, he did solve those issues. He did not flunk out of Yale. He did graduate from Yale. He got that under control, but now he's at a crossroads. He's finished Karateka finally. He's just about to graduate. He has a little classwork left to do. He's got 2 screenplays that he has been working on because there's a part of him that still wants to be in the movie business. There's also the matter of Broderbund is really pleased with Karateka, and this video game business thing could be something that continues to work out. In earlier years when he was thinking about this, he kind of saw video games and computer games as an exciting new technological realm where there was a chance to make a mark, become famous, and do something new and exciting. He really loved film, and a huge part of him really wanted to be a screenwriter. But he kept that part of himself at bay, according to his journals, which are our primary source of information, pulling some from other interviews here and there as well, but we're primarily using the journals for these episodes. He kept that part of himself at bay by reminding himself that film was an old medium at this point, and a lot of it had already been figured out. Are there still advances from time to time in special effects, in this and that? Absolutely. And of course, once you hit the digital age, as in getting rid of film and going to all digital recording instead and more advanced special effects. Funnily enough, movies were on the brink of a huge revolution as well, but that wasn't necessarily totally clear to him in 1985, even though there had been special effects advances in Star Wars, at Industrial Light and Magic, just in the past few years. He felt that movies were largely solved, that all the technical challenges had been done. So he could work in that medium, which he loved, but he wouldn't be a trailblazer. He wouldn't be an innovator. Computer games seemed to be something new. Flash forward to 1985, and that's really not the case anymore, quite frankly. We did a whole 3-part episode on the home computer price wars over the course of 1982, 1983. And obviously, we've also done about 1 million episodes on the video game industry crash, both on the crash in arcade video games that began in 1982 and the crash in console video games that began in 1983 in the aftermath of a disastrous Christmas season in 1982. By 1985, the landscape is very different, and it's really not certain that this is going to be this exciting new medium to get on the ground floor of anymore. I bring this up every time that I bring up the crash. I certainly know that from the perspective of consumers that remained loyal to games through this entire period, that maybe went to the arcades or owned a VCS or an Intellivision or even a ColecoVision, and then just moved on to their Commodore 64 or maybe engaged further with their Apple IIe. It didn't feel like the industry was over, but it really, in this time period, in a lot of ways, felt like the industry was over. And that doesn't mean games were over. That doesn't mean that people would suddenly no longer find fiddling around on their computers interesting, or that playing games on their computers would be interesting. But there was a very real question here of, is it economical? Can we actually sustain a business where there are professional game designers and professional game programmers making games? It was in real doubt in this period of time. You saw all the price erosion in the console space. In the computer game space, it wasn't quite the same, but there were other factors going on there as well, because you did have the crash of the home computer market. Even though the Commodore 64 kind of came out of that, and the Apple IIe, at least for a couple of years, came out of that and continued to be a thing that you could release games on, the market did contract a little bit from the high. There were fewer platforms out there to support fewer publishers. You also had the very simple fact that the price of disk drives was coming down, so that most people, or many people at least by this point, were starting to have dual disk drives. What having dual disk drives means is you can copy the heck out of that floppy. So piracy was also a huge concern.
With the industry crashing, let's say a hypothetical here, does that mean that going forward in an alternate reality here, would the makers of games just be an axillary arm of some sort of entertainment thing where, like, okay, we just have Bob over there, he makes games periodically for these things to entertain the kiddies, and we're having fun here? Or would it be more like a cottage industry of independent artists doing really small developments, really small runs, and just bedroom coders, effectively?
You know, I think that was a lot of the fear. The entire structure was changing during this time. Mechner has some journal entries that speak right to this. In our last episode, we read directly from the journal a few times, and I'd like to do that again, because really that's what the crux of these episodes are about. Here, for example, is one from July 5th, 1985. By this time, Karateka has established itself as a hit in the industry. It has been a chart topper. There was a brief period of time where Billboard magazine was running charts for video games and computer games in the same way that they did for music. Karateka was a chart topper. It hit number 1 at one point, and it stayed around in the upper part of the charts for a while. So here in July 5th, 1985, just about a year after the game has come out, this is one of the periods of times when Jordan is really struggling to decide, do I really want to write games? This is just an excerpt from the entry. Part of what he says here, to give a little further context, this is right after he graduated Yale. And he decided to take a trip to Broderbund, a trip to California, to stay there for a couple of months in the summer while he was trying to figure out what he wanted to do, with perhaps the goal of actually moving out to California within the next year or so. He was feeling very smothered at home. You know, he's graduated Yale. He's living off his Karateka royalties. He doesn't have to get a job right away because he's got those royalties, and he's trying to figure out, Am I going to be a star game designer? Am I going to be a screenwriter? He's just trying to figure his life out and doesn't feel like he can do that at home. So is thinking of maybe moving out there. But for the moment, he's just coming out for a couple of months. And so he's been meeting with the people there, talking with the people there at Broderbund. I'll just let him take it over from here. He's staying with his friend Robert Cook, who is a fellow game programmer. He didn't release any super important games. But he's staying with Robert Cook, and at this time, Karateka is a bestseller. So in this entry, Robert is all psyched up to do a new game now. My presence seems to have that effect on him, so just Jordan being there. Me, I've been having serious doubts about doing another computer game. On the one hand, if I live at home for much longer, I'll go stir crazy. This is him debating whether he wants to come out and not become a Broderbund employee, but live in Marin County, live near Broderbund. Broderbund at that time kept very few people on staff, but they had office space enough, we talked about this a little bit last time, that they would let some of their independent developers come in and work there and work on games in their office. What I need is a place to go, friends, work. Moving to Marin and doing another game for Broderbund would give me that. But it would take time away from screenwriting. In the time it'll take me to do a new game, I could write 3 screenplays. And the games business is drying up. His words. Karateka may make me as little as $75,000 all told, and it's at the top of the charts. There's no guarantee the new game will be as successful, or that there will even be a computer games market a couple of years from now. It's a real decline. Some of the bigger companies, or not necessarily bigger companies, but some of the companies run by these MBAs have come in, like Electronic Arts, like Activision. Activision obviously being a company that has existed already, but is now moving heavily into the computer game space in the wake of the crash in its core Atari market. It's squeezing out a lot of the developers. It's consolidating a little. And there's the piracy issue, which is also just driving down sales. There's been the home computer crash. Even though the Commodore 64 is still selling, the hardware industry is in disarray. The Mac launched, and the Mac did not do as well initially as Apple had hoped it would. There's a real sense of pessimism around the home computer industry and computer games at this time. With the benefit of hindsight, we know that it all works out, but Jordan doesn't know that. He takes such a very different tone here than he did earlier when he was like, yeah, I could be a screenwriter, but in computer games, I'm at the beginning of something new and exciting. I'm at the dawn of an industry. I can help shape a new industry. And that excited him. But now it doesn't look like the beginning of a new industry anymore. It looks like a flash in the pan, and it looks like a dying industry. So without that allure, without that idea that he's riding the wave of something new and big, now the screenwriting thing is starting to take hold of him again. His very next entry that he published in the journal, again, these are abridged. He did not abridge any of the entries that he chose to share, but he did not share every entry that he wrote. His next entry on July 10th, he talks about visiting the Broderbund offices for the first time on this little trip that he's taking for the summer. Seeing everybody again really energizes him, and he gets the sense that Broderbund is kind of doing okay. Because, of course, Broderbund at this point has the print shop. We talk about all of that in our Broderbund episodes. It's not so much the games that are fueling Broderbund in kind of this transitory period here. It's print shop. It's that making the banners on your computer with your own printer thing that is sustaining them at this time. And it's selling like hotcakes. He's re-energized a little bit again by visiting the Broderbund offices. I'm not going to read the whole entry, but he even says Broderbund's doing well. Print shop is doing insanely well. I'm almost convinced I want to move out here and do another game. And then there's a paragraph break. And then the next paragraph is a single sentence. After I write my first screenplay. So there's been a shift in his mind on where his priorities truly lie at this point.
So really with that change in his priorities, he's seeing this disconnect of what's going on in the industries. Trying to figure out how to answer my question from before. Is it more like he sees the shift to a more cottage industry and therefore he's like, I don't want to be part of that because it's just sort of this really small, minor thing, flash in the pan kind of thing. I know that screenwriting is going to have a more sustained source of income and enjoyment for me that's going to provide entertainment and creative freedom for a long time, while this video game thing seems to be pretty minor, and really the great advanced video games that are made have already come to pass.
Well, it's not that there may not be some other great games that come to pass, or that screenwriting is necessarily going to be lucrative. I mean, I think he's realistic about how hard it would be to make it in that industry as well. But I think the screenwriting is his first passion. He likes video games, he likes computer games, and he likes making them. Obviously, and spoiler alert, he ends up staying in the industry and making a lot of them, even though he took a couple of breaks here and there. I get the sense that while he's somewhat fascinated by it and recognizes that he's good at it, that his first love is really the film business and screenwriting. If he can't figure out an angle, like it's new, it's exciting, it's potentially lucrative, I could become famous, I could be a pioneer, if he can't find an angle like that or a hook like that to keep him into the computer game thing, he's much more inclined to stick with the screenwriting. And there's another entry that's a little bit illuminating on this as well, that is from the end of his trip. So he just stayed for a couple of weeks. I think I said months, but he actually just stays for a couple of weeks with Broderbund. On July 18th, 1985, he's leaving, and his friend Tommy Pierce, who was the co-founder of a small developer called Sensei that also does work for Broderbund, and so they've also been in the Broderbund offices, is driving him back to the airport, and they have a conversation. As he recounts it in this July 18th entry, driving me to the airport, Tommy said, "I think you should pursue screenwriting. Go for it." I was surprised and asked her why. She said that Broderbund is a really nice, warm, friendly place to work, but for programmers, it's actually not that great a deal. The older ones, like Chris and David, Chris Jochmanson and David Snyder, who released some of the earlier games, are starting to get scared because programming's the only marketable skill they have, and it's a young man's game. You have to remember at this point, Jordan Mechner's 21 years old. He graduated college just before his 20th birthday because he's a smart guy. It's kind of weird for them, and Tommy or Tommy is probably a little bit older, but probably not that much older. So when they say a young man's game, these aren't people in their 40s or 50s talking about it being a young man's game. These are like people in their 20s talking about it being a young man's game. But then she goes on, the new crop of kids coming up are willing to work harder and cheaper and don't have girlfriends or families yet to cut into their working hours. Nobody knows how long the games market will be around or what it'll be like next year. I never would have thought of it quite like that. As I said, there's just a lot of uncertainty about the long-term viability of this business, and so publishers are cutting back. They're cutting back on their titles. They're cutting back on their royalty packages. There's less money to be made. Mechner is not going to make as much on Karateka as one would have thought for a number one game compared to, say, what Dan Gorlin made with Choplifter. He's not going to be making nearly as much. Publishers are also hedging their bets and waiting to see how this thing turns out. As they're cutting back, they're happy to just cut the old generation loose, not that it's very old, and let another group of young kids come up, and because they'll work for less, and then maybe it's all over in a couple of years, so we milk them, and then we're done. And this is the point of view of somebody who's frustrated working in the industry, so it's a bias, it's a point of view, and there may be some cynicism there. It's probably not quite as bleak as all of that. But that's still the feeling. Nobody really knows what this thing is anymore. Nobody's actually convinced it has long-term viability. Profits are down, costs are up. Everyone's just trying to save a buck and go as cheaply as they can as they kind of navigate this really weird period. It just doesn't seem to him like necessarily a great time to be getting into computer games when he's always had this idea that he wants to be a screenwriter. There's a lot of conflict here, and that conflict is going to continue over the course of the next 4 years in his mind. Turning our attention back to the game now, because he does have a game idea, as we talked about before. I read this entry last time, so this is a bit repetitive, but I want to read this entry again so that we have the full context here of where he is in this time period. On about April of 1985, Karateka's done, Karateka's out, and he's starting to think about the next thing, and he's just brainstorming and thinking. One of his friends suggested that he do something again with animation like he did with Karateka, because the animation in that game truly was way ahead of anything that was going on at the time with the rotoscoping he was doing. But maybe use littler, smaller characters like the characters in Lode Runner or Choplifter that don't take up the whole screen. Jordan, as he says in his journal, immediately liked this idea because if the guy's little, then you can have him in a much bigger world and you can do more with him. Karateka was fine, side-scrolling, moving in a straight line, having some fights ever so often. But if you want to do anything more than just moving left to right or right to left with occasional breaks to have an encounter, you're not going to be able to do anything more complex with that, with characters of that size, not in this time period, not with the resources available on the Apple II. He starts thinking about what that might be, what he could do with a little guy with great control and great animation, similar to Karateka, but with a smaller character. And then he creates an entry on April 4th, 1985. So a few months before those journal entries I just read during his time in Broderbund. Spent the evening on Drax. Now, I want to stop here and call attention to this, because at the time I didn't fully understand what Drax was, and I was speculating. It's like, is this a computer network that he's spending time on? Like, what does this mean? One of our listeners on Patreon did contact us and explained that in one of the many interviews Jordan Mechner's done, because he's done a bunch, he actually explained what was going on here. Drax is actually the sprite tool that Jordan Mechner created to make Karateka and other games. The reason it has that name is he called his original iteration of it Draw, because it's for drawing sprite-based graphics. When he did some significant updates to it, rather than calling it like Draw 1.5 or Draw 2.0 or something like that, he thought it would be cute to increment the last letter by one letter instead. So what's the next letter in the alphabet after W? X. So Draw became Drax. When we reference Drax, that is what we were talking about. We are talking about the tool he uses to create his sprite graphics on these games. On Prince of Persia, it would actually be updated once again and became Dre, because he went one letter up one more time, and X became Y. So thank you for that one. As always, we are open to feedback, corrections, insights, etc. from our loyal listeners.
That was from Johan S. Thank you again, Johan, for sending that in and letting us know.
Indeed. So going back to the entry, spent the evening on Drax, more design decisions. 1. A puzzle game like Lode Runner and Dr. Creep. The kind where you start out on a new level and say, okay, what am I going to have to do here? The kind with 50 levels and 5 different games in a builder mode where you make your own games, only with great graphics. So I'm going to pause there. This time we're going to parse the entry. We're not just going to say it. We're going to parse it a little bit. This is at the crux of what he's thinking about doing, and even though he mentions Lode Runner, his real inspiration here is that other game, which he shorthanded as Dr. Creep here, but which the full name is The Castles of Dr. Creep. Now, both Lode Runner and The Castles of Dr. Creep do share some similarities, so I'm sure he's taking influence from both. But basically, The Castles of Dr. Creep is a Commodore 64 game. Pretty obscure, was not a great seller even in its own time, but it had these expansive levels, the castles, that you had to move through. You're climbing up and down ladders and moving between platforms, and then there are a bunch of switches and doorbells and whatnot that you have to trigger to cause platforms to get connected or to cause gates to open and to progress through these sprawling levels, all the while avoiding some enemies on the screen as well. So, yeah, that already sounds a little like Prince of Persia, doesn't it, Jeffrey?
Just a bit, especially as I quickly look through a few videos here. It is definitely influenced. You see the various traps and puzzles. You have almost like the same kind of stairwell, too, of going up and down.
Mm-hmm.
Various creatures moving around. It's definitely the start of a concept, and certainly something that would influence a later iterative design.
Absolutely. But of course, the animation is typical of the time animation. I mean, there's nothing particularly realistic looking about any of the characters, nor about the way they move.
They're waddling spiders.
Yeah, exactly. And that's no knock. I mean, it's the times. So he's thinking of doing something like the Castles of Dr. Creep, but, with that level of amazing animation that he brought to Karateka. So that's point 1 in this journal entry. Point 2, real perspective. This will be a bitch, but I think worth it. Nothing else really more to say about that. Then number 3, a Karateka-type storyline. Get to the end and rescue the girl. Large figure Karateka-style animated sequences at the beginning and end. A human interest to complement the cool logic of the gameplay, because he thinks that's something important. And then number 4, lots of ways of getting squashed, impaled, crushed, and otherwise destroyed. Basically, Indiana Jones in spirit, if not in details. Plenty of narrow escapes, split-second timing, hair-raising brushes with death. And that's the other crux of it, because, yeah, Dr. Creep has some traps in it and things you have to avoid every so often there. But when he says basically Indiana Jones, what he's really thinking of is those first 10 minutes, roughly, of Raiders of the Lost Ark, when Dr. Jones and a young Alfred Molina are traversing a temple in the jungles of Central or South America in order to get a golden idol. And every step of the way, sometimes literally step of the way, there's another trap, another obstacle. There are spikes to avoid. There are darts to avoid. There are pits to jump over. And then, of course, as he's reversing path and it's all falling apart, a giant boulder chasing after him as well. This idea that danger lurks around every corner, and not just that you overcome these obstacles, but you just barely overcome these obstacles. Because one thing that has always defined Indiana Jones and Indiana Jones movies is that Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones, gets so beat up and so beat down, and most of the time it's just a near miss whenever he is overcoming an obstacle. And so he wants that same sense in Prince of Persia, not just that you have to avoid a trap, not just that you have to jump over a pit, but that the timing is such that you only have a split second to get through that trap, or the distance between the pits is just enough that you can't just necessarily jump across like Mario would jump across a pit in Super Mario Brothers, but that maybe it's just far enough out of reach that you actually have to grab the edge of the other side and then pull yourself up, or rather than the character pulls himself up, rather than just, making the jump cleanly. He wants everything to have that kind of Indiana Jones feel of always being on the edge of disaster, but always moving forward. Then, as we said, the last time, then the entry ended, big questions remaining. Where, when, who is the villain, what's the MacGuffin? Are you in ancient Greece, medieval Europe, a remote planet, a futuristic metropolis? Note, none of those are the Middle East. None of those are an Arabian setting. I don't think he was thinking of it at this time. More on that in a second. Are your enemies rovers? That could be cool, a big bouncing spheroid. Robots, guards with crossbows, or what? What's the theme, the setting? He's got this bit of an idea forming here when he's still got a bit of enthusiasm, but then, of course, he puts it aside, as we said, for a couple of months because he's finishing up his classes. He's finishing up his senior project. He's also writing screenplays at the same time. So he has that basic concept, but then it gets away from him a little bit because he really does start to question whether this is what he should be doing, which is what we talked about before. As with the earlier, the theme in his journals, even taking out the industry conditions, taking out his competing desires to be screenwriter or game designer, even putting all of that aside, you do get a sense reading his journals that he has that certain kind of, it may not really be ADHD. I don't know that he's diagnosed with anything like that, and I wouldn't want to pretend to be able to diagnose something like that. May not necessarily be ADHD, but more the way that somebody who's really smart and really good at a lot of things just gets pulled in very different directions all the time and gets very distracted and can't focus on one thing. There's a definite sense of that with him. So, his enthusiasm ebbs and wanes regardless of other circumstances. But that is definitely one of the big things he's worried about, is those economic conditions. But also, I just think he has trouble staying focused on one thing for too long. He's having these moments of doubt, even as he's at Broderbund. But one thing that does come out of that trip to Broderbund is he's brainstorming with some of the company's on-site designers, because the company maintains a small number of people that are in-house designers. And these people sometimes work on their own projects, and they also kind of exist to serve as brainstorming partners for other people that are making games for Broderbund as well. It's kind of a unique system that Broderbund has going here, where they have in-house designers that will also lend their expertise to their outside developers. So when he's on that trip to Broderbund that we're talking about, he did talk to Gene Portwood a bit, one of those in-house designers, former Disney animator. We've talked about him before in the last episode and in other Broderbund episodes as well. He's brainstorming with them, and the two of them together come up with the idea on July 17th, 1985, if we want to be exact about it, of setting the game in an Arabian Nights style setting. As he puts it, Alibaba, Sinbad. It's versatile, familiar, visually distinctive, and in the video game field, hasn't been done to death. That was the real thing that made him warm to it, I think, more than anything else, because we talked about how he always wants to make a mark. He doesn't want to just be following along. He wants to be a pioneer in this field. There'd been so much science fiction, there'd been so much fantasy, there'd been all of that stuff, but there really hadn't been very much done in an Arabian Nights Middle Eastern setting. Really, that kind of setting was dormant in the wider popular culture as well. That would change when Disney in 1992 released a little movie called Aladdin. But in this period of time, that was kind of a dormant idea in entertainment generally, and certainly hadn't really been done in video games. So the reason for going for that Arabian setting, and it really is an Arabian setting, it's called Prince of Persia, but it really has more of the Thief of Baghdad in it, which is Iraq, which is Arabia, not Persia, than it does kind of a Persian theme to it. In fact, he called it Baghdad as he was creating it, which I'm sure is a reference to The Thief of Baghdad. He's a student of film. That's one of the very early classic films. It was somebody at Broderbund that changed the name to Prince of Persia. I guess they just liked that alliteration or something, because it's definitely more Arabian Nights and more Arabian Peninsula than it is Persia. That's when and how they came up with the theme. So despite all of his reservations, he actually does get started on it a little bit in August 1985. He comes home from that trip and he's actually energized. Broderbund seems kind of interested in the idea of doing something. The whole kind of story of it comes to him, as he says it in an entry on August 28th. I saw the scenes in my mind as if it were a Disney movie. So I wrote up a scenario, churned it out in 1 hour. He had a basic story in place, the basic story of the game, very quickly after coming home. He's feeling really energized. On August 30th, he even says, another good day on the game, and then parentheses, screenplay. What screenplay? So he'd been spending a lot of time after finishing Karateka working on screenplays, but now suddenly he's all about games again, at least for a brief moment in time. Long enough to start thinking about what he wants to do. He decides that what he really needs to do to be able to make this work is he needs not just to rotoscope in the way that he did the first time, but he actually needs to use a digitizer. So he can take frames of film that he makes, of filming that he does, and import those directly into the computer to do his rotoscoping over them. The problem with that is that he's going to need a video camera and a VCR and a digitizer that is going to run to several $1,000s. And at this point, he hasn't really started getting those Karateka royalties yet. He doesn't really have several $1,000s to his name. What he decides to do, in his own words in his journal, he did, or his family did, probably his personally, have a Diners Club credit card. The Diners Club would offer you special deals on exclusive items, private labeling of stuff. He decided that he would buy a VCR video camera, a digitizer, using his Diners Club card, and then return them within the return period. Use them really fast and then return them.
Yeah, that's a thing people do.
In his own words on September 25th, 1985, these are his own words, I feel so dishonest. He felt conflicted about it, but it was the only way to get the equipment he needed. He couldn't afford it, but he knew he needed this to have the level of animation that he felt was necessary. He had to top what he did in Karateki. He had to have the best and greatest animation out there. He had to have the greatest, most fluidly animated characters you've ever seen in a video game. This is what it was going to take, a few $1,000s of equipment. He did that. The first thing that he got was the VCR and the video camera, $2,500 between them. And then he started filming his brother, David. The first game, he had filmed Karate Instructor. He doesn't need someone who's trained in martial arts this time because he's just doing very basic movements, running, jumping, climbing, skidding to a halt, turning around, etc. So he doesn't need a martial artist. So he videotapes his brother, David, doing all of these motions. He doesn't have his digitizer yet, but he does all of this in October 1985 in a parking lot. That's all he can do until he can finally get his hands on a digitizer. So I think the digitizer is separate. He didn't get the digitizer from Diners Club like the other things. That was just the camera and the VCR, so he could get everything he needed very quickly and then turn it back in. Then he had to wait until he could get his hands on a digitizer to do much more. So work stalls during this time period. He doesn't give us many journal entries from this time period. I assume that he continued to work on his screenplay. He definitely continued to feel stifled living in his parents' home. He felt he needed to get away from the East Coast, and he had to get to California. That's part of, I think, what kept the computer game dream alive, too. He's kind of like, I want to be a screenwriter long term, but I need to get out of the house now. And the only way a move to California works, he doesn't want to be waiting tables in L.A., while he tries to hand producers his screenplay at their table or something. He feels the only way a move to California works is if he keeps doing the computer game thing because he knows Broderbund will give him office space. I mean, he'll have to find an apartment and all of that stuff, but Broderbund will give him office space to work, and he can kind of live off of his royalties while he does this until he has another game for them. I think that's part of what drives him to keep the computer game thing in the forefront of his mind as much as anything else. The journals are a little silent on this because he skips around a bit in this period. So that's where things kind of end until April 1986, when the digitizer finally arrives. And he also finally gets a new contract from Broderbund because he's been negotiating a contract for his next game all of this time. They went to offer him a really low royalty rate because companies are pulling back, like I said. So he gets a contract signed, his digitizer arrives, and then he realizes that the footage that he shot earlier with his brother is, in his own word, useless. And the reason for that is the digitizer actually has some real limitations to it. First of all, it can only recognize black and white, two shades. So it can digitize white things that it pulls out of a black background. That's basically all it can do. Or I guess theoretically vice versa as well. But that's basically all it can do.
That just sounds like a very primitive and very basic form of masking. A green screen, in effect.
Yeah.
I have a black background, I have a white thing in front, and I'm copying the movement. Let's throw everything into high contrast and go from there.
Exactly. And then the other thing is it can't reduce or enlarge. If he needs to change the size of any of his sprites or any of these images to use them as sprites, he can't do that. He's stuck with the size they were on the original tape.
At that point, you have to remake everything. Take that all into account, have a black screen behind you, put the person in white.
Yeah.
Make sure you have the focal length and the positioning correct so that you have the character at the right size you want for the game.
Yeah, and how can you possibly always know that in advance while you're shooting? When you're one guy like this working alone with limited tools. I mean, I realize a special effects studio could do that, but we're not talking about a special effects studio. We are talking about one man working alone with very primitive tools. How can you even be sure that you have all of that set up for what you need later? It's not going to work as is, so he has to solve this. The first thing he decides is like, well, okay, I can paint my brother white on the film that I have. I can paint my brother white, give him a white turban, and then just black out everything immediately around him. Go through literally frame by frame. He's not going to take every frame because film is at 24 frames per second, and he's not taking all 24 frames per second. He's identifying key frames that show the amount of movement that he needs to get a full believable motion, and he's just using those frames. So it's not like he has to go through and doctor every frame, literally 24 frames every second of film he shot. He needs to go in and identify the key frames, the ones that he needs, and then he can manually doctor them by painting his brother white, painting a white turban over top of his head, and then blacking out everything right around him. Anyone who's played the original Prince of Persia on the Apple II may note that the prince is dressed all in white. He has flesh tones on his skin in the game, but there's a reason his default costume is white in that game, and that's because he had to start from a position of a digitized character that was entirely white.
That can be a challenge. I'm just going to imagine, like, I've seen film. It's small. You just have to have, like, a magnifier or something there, then a really, really small paintbrush, and he's just going, dink, dink.
Right. Yeah, I don't know exactly how, but I know because he shared images of it. I mean, he shared images of his brother with black all around him and him just painted in white. So this is definitely a thing. But then the other thing is he has to figure out how he can manipulate these images to get them to the size he wants. He's thinking about it, and he's like, well, maybe I should pull out the old Super 8 again. You know, use the old Super 8 on the footage for Karateka and then use the Moviola that they had, the editing machine they had, to go through and pick out frames. It's like, maybe I should film on the Super 8, use the Moviola to step through frames, because that's an editing machine, so it allows you to step through frames, bring them up one at a time, train the video camera on that screen, hooked up directly to the digitizer, then have the video camera pull the image off of the Super 8 footage in the editor, because that way he could zoom in and out with the video camera, he could get the size he needed, and then directly digitize it in the digitizer. Very complicated, but it's not the fact that it's complicated that gets him to decide this isn't going to work. It's that it would mean he'd have to develop the Super 8 film and would need a movie camera and a video camera both. He'd need two cameras, and he'd need to develop the Super 8 film. So he's like, okay, that's kind of silly. That's not going to work. But what he finally comes up with is almost as crazy, but it's the only way to make it work with what he has. So he ponders this problem for a while. In the meantime, he does move out to California in the fall of 1986. You know, he was pondering all this in April, May. Now flash forward, it's the fall of 1986. It's September, early fall. He's out in California now, working there, and he finally solves the problem. What he decided that he would do is he would photograph the frames. He can still use the footage that he's already shot, I believe, using this method. He's used a video camera to film footage. Then he'll use a normal 35mm camera to photograph the frames that he's going to use. Then he will get prints made of those frames that he can then retouch and then digitize the prints using a Sony video camera where he films the print, and then the Sony video camera is hooked up to the digitizer, so that film of the print can be digitized by the digitizer.
That kind of sounds like how certain things with animation is done with cartoons, especially back in the day. You would actually layer everything and then take pictures of that, and then that would be your final composite shot.
Yeah.
I think it is, in fact, called compositing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that sounds like what he's doing. He's doing it in a little bit of a weird way because he already has a film he's using, but it does make sense because he needs to effectively recomposite everything in a certain way, and he has limited resources, so let's just take the inspiration of animation. I mean, he's a film buff, he likes Disney and everything, so he would obviously know that, hey, this is how we do compositing, where we take all these things where we want to change what's going on, and then rekajigger it into a new setup.
Indeed. So it's wild, it's jury-rigged to hell, but it works. Because let me tell you, obviously we're going to include Apple II Prince of Persia, you know, the original version of it in the show notes. I mean, obviously we're going to do that.
Already have it.
Yeah. If you have not played that game or have not seen footage of the game, then I urge you to go into the show notes and do that video, or go to YouTube and use your video of choice, however you want to do it, and actually look at the original Prince of Persia, because the animation is truly astounding.
Especially for an Apple II. For an Apple II, you do not have that degree of detail. You don't have that degree of fluid animation for the character moving around, let alone have all these flickering torches in the background while all that is going on. You would think for animation it would just be the character. You wouldn't have a background image where you have torches going off. That would take too much effort. You should just have a static torch. But no, he's got animation.
Yeah, it's so good because it's so fluid and lifelike. Because, I mean, there were some other games that had animation back then, some of it pretty decent, but it didn't necessarily feel like human movement in the way this does. And, I mean, the frame rate's a little low. It's a little jerky to the eye. It feels a little like things are happening in slow motion and jerkily because it's at a much lower frame rate than the human eye processes motion. But it still looks so realistic. If he's running and he stops, he doesn't just stop, like I'm running, like, say, Mario does. In some games Mario skids, but really, like Mario does, it's not like I'm running, and now I'm stopped running. It's like, no, he actually has to, like, skid himself, slide himself to a halt. When he turns around, it's not just a mirroring of the sprite where suddenly he's facing in the other direction. He actually turns around using a motion that a human would use to turn his body around. When he's pulling himself up from a ledge, he is pulling himself up on a ledge with real human motion. Because these are all motions that he filmed. Most of them were David, his brother, in a couple of sessions. He did some pickup shots with some other people in California to get a few more things that he needed. But it's all real people doing those motions and then him picking out the frames and rotoscoping over them. It's incredible, quite frankly.
You really don't get this with any kind of Apple II game at all.
You didn't get it in many games anywhere at that time. Even on more powerful systems that could theoretically do more, they did not tend to be animated in this way. This was something new. Even compared to Karateka, this was something new, which is why Prince of Persia is such an incredibly influential game still today. This is the crux of it. And he's figured that part out. By September 1986, he's figured that part of it out. You would think the hard part's over at that point. He's got a setting, he's got a theme, he's got an objective. He has basic gameplay beats in mind, taken from puzzle games like Lode Runner and Castles of Dr. Creep. He's got his animation. You would think the hard part would be over. This game's going to be out he might need another year to put it all together, but you figure by 1987 at the latest, this thing's going to be out, right?
I would hope so, but I'm guessing it's not because he gets distracted.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things going on there. First of all, it's just his level of distraction. He gets distracted by things. He gets a new Mac that he's playing around with. He's playing around with other tools and toys. I don't mean literal toys like children's toys, but like, in the Batman sense of where does he get such wonderful toys. He gets distracted playing around with all of this stuff. The situation at Broderbund is not great. The company's gotten a little bigger. The Carlstons have stepped back a little bit. There's a new wave of middle management that seems less enamored with games. Obviously, Broderbund has spread out to do educational software and print shop and other stuff. It's not just a game company anymore. There's a relocation. The independent developers get kicked out of the main Broderbund office and sent to another building that they have space in that is not as nice. That kind of drags on him a little bit, all of the internal kind of politics going on at Broderbund. That stuff is all kind of delaying him a lot through the end of 1986 and the beginning of 1987. Progress, as a result, just slows to a crawl. But even as late as February, he is still hoping to have the game finished by August 1987. In one of his journal entries, that's mentioned. He talks about all the vacillating he's doing and all of that, but he's still trying to work on all of this to have it done by August. He starts getting a little momentum here and there. For instance, there's an entry on April 1st, 1987. In the past 3 weeks, I put in the equivalent of maybe one full 8-hour day on Baghdad. I'm starting to feel guilty about it. Baghdad, we'll remember, is what he was calling Prince of Persia as he was developing it. He's playing hooky a lot. He occasionally gets some inspiration and will put some time on it, but he's slacking on it. Then May 4th, 1987 happens. And this really throws things into a tailspin. I'm just going to read this entry in its entirety. Big news. All caps. Virginia Gertlian of Leading Artists, that's his agency because he has written a script and he has retained an agent and he is shopping it around, so Leading Artists is his agency, called to say she loved my script. She's given it to her boss, Jim Burkus, to read and will get back to me in the next couple of days. Then the very next day, May 5th, 1987, Jim and Virginia called back the next morning. He'd read Birthstone, his script, loved it, and asked if I have other movie ideas and if I'm available for rewrite work. Suddenly, it looks like the dream is gonna be real. He'd sent his script out to agencies while he was still doing this computer game thing. Don't know much about Birthstone. It appears to be a movie somewhat in the vein of a Goonies or a Gremlins involving young protagonists and adventure and maybe some supernatural elements. He was a big fan of both the Goonies and Gremlins. He also admired basically how Chris Columbus caught the eye of Steven Spielberg and basically had Spielberg as a patron. And Chris Columbus was the writer of Goonies and Gremlins, later went on to direct Home Alone and the first couple of Harry Potter movies, became a big star. But, you know, Steven Spielberg became a mentor and a supporter. He kind of liked that as well, so kind of admired Chris Columbus. Yeah, so that was his movie Birthstone, and it has been picked up by an agency that wants to shop it around, which is big news. No other way to put it. So basically, for the next year, this becomes the majority of his life. He doesn't technically stop working on the game for Broderbund. He doesn't technically give up being a video game designer. But for about a year here, his entire focus is now on becoming a screenwriter, not just rewriting his script, but also working on pitching it to people and also trying to pitch ideas for other scripts that people might be interested in. Like, this becomes his life because now the dream is about to become a reality. The next month, Birthstone is optioned by a producer named Larry Terman, who most famously was the producer on The Graduate, classic movie at the end of the 60s, and had just recently made a little family film that's near and dear to my heart called Short Circuits. Terman wanted to make Birthstone. He wanted to produce it. He took it on and he was going to start pitching it to directors, and the hope was that this would get made into a movie. We don't really need to linger on this lost year because it's kind of outside of the realm of video games, but basically they do pitch the movie around. Terman pitches it around. A lot of directors are kind of like, yeah, this is kind of good looking. It's kind of okay, but I don't really want to do this. So it gets turned down by everybody over the course of about a year. The other ideas that he pitches don't really excite his agency, and so they never really move forward. Nothing ever actually gets made here. As Mechner himself has said in more recent interviews, not in the journal, that's actually really good for a first-time screenwriter. To get their first script to get serious heat, serious interest, and get shopped around. At that point, he probably, if he put in enough blood, sweat, and tears and combined that with a little energon and a lot of luck, at this point, he might have been able to break in as a screenwriter. Birthstone was not going to get made, but he could have potentially used that process as a springboard to become a Hollywood screenwriter, or at least have a go at it. Maybe he doesn't end up being successful, but he would have probably gone from there to writing a script that did actually get turned into a movie. And then from there, who knows what would happen. As he put it, that was a maybe. Maybe I devote all of my time to screenwriting. Maybe I get a script accepted. Maybe I get a script shot. Maybe that script is a hit. Maybe I can become a screenwriter. Maybe. But now he's thinking to himself, I have no sure things in screenwriting, and I'm feeling a little dejected because I did get rejected by all these people. Rejection sucks. But I'm working on a game right now. I'm working on a video game, computer game right now. And I have a company that is going to publish. I have a contract. He has signed a contract for this. I have a contract for a game right now. This game will be published and I will be a game designer. I am already a game designer. So at this point, he reluctantly turns his back for the moment on the Hollywood thing. Dream's not dead, believe me, but for the moment, he turns his back on the Hollywood thing and decides that he has to fully recommit himself to making his game. But he lost a lot of time on that. It's 1988 now. It's not that he didn't work on the game at all in 1987, but he lost most of 1987 to all of this. So it's 1988 now, and he has another problem now, because the Nintendo Entertainment System has fully established itself. The Commodore 64 market is starting to hit a precipitous decline, and the Apple II market is expected to be dead any moment now.
So where is he going to publish this game if the Apple II is pretty much dead in the water? The Commodore 64, it looks pretty, but it's dying. Thank you, Jack Tramiel.
Yeah.
What do we go to now? This IBM PC or something?
Well, I mean, yes, Broderbund wants an IBM PC port, for sure, because the IBM PC is rising in the game space. But no, I mean, it's too late for that. His entire system, all of his tools, his entire digitization system, all the stuff he's doing, it's an Apple II game. So he has to stick with the Apple II, but now he actually has to get this thing done while there is still an Apple II market to release it into. So pressure's on. He's lost all of this time. The unfortunate thing is there's some problems with it. The animation's great. A lot of the basic ideas are great, but there isn't much of a game there yet. And we're going to tackle a couple of things in turn. We're going to tackle them in the same order that Mr. Mechner did, as revealed in his journal. The first problem is there are no enemies in the game. There are traps, there are pits, there are plates you have to step on or hit in order to make things happen. But there are no enemies. And this is by design, but not by choice. Because basically, he is working on an Apple II. An Apple II is a wee bit memory constrained as a system. His animation takes up a lot of memory. There is no room, Jeffrey, for any other people in this game.
Well, he has to have figured it out because I see him fighting with a sword. Page flipping, what is it?
So there's two phases to this. The first was actually the development of what he calls Shadow Man.
Shadow Man.
This is something that is in the final game. Those that have played it will know that on a certain level of the game, you have to jump through a mirror. When you jump through the mirror, out the other side pops a shadowy replica of your character. This was the first way he solved it. And it was actually, as he puts it himself, Tommy Pierce, who we talked about before, the co-founder of Sensei, that was a fellow developer that worked with Broderbund, who actually came up with the idea. He was talking with Tommy. Tommy was asking, because, he's having people play it all along, play test, play through it as he's playing it. So Tommy's played it, and Tommy has a very good question, which is why there are no enemies. He explains that there's not enough memory. She shoots back, according to the journal, why not use the same animations for your enemies the way you did in Karateka? Because he did that. His response wouldn't work so well this time. This character is designed to look cute. He has a very specific personality in the way he runs and moves. So it's not interchangeable. The Karateka character just did martial arts moves, and the enemies just did martial arts moves. But he filmed this character to have personality in the way he does all of his motions. So he says the enemies would have to be cute, too. So then Tommy responded, can't you just change the face or the costume? Jordan responds back. Again, this is all in the journal entry. Not possible. If I change anything, it's a whole new set of shapes. There's just no memory. Then, as he says, she wouldn't give up. She says, couldn't you make him a different color, say black? So he started to explain that that wouldn't work, but then he realized that if he, and this is his own words, I'm not technical, but in his own words, he realized that if he did an exclusive OR each frame with itself, bit shifted 1 pixel over, he would have a ghostly, shimmering outline of a figure, black with white face and arms, that could use all of your same animations. She actually named it. He described that to her, and she came up with the name Shadow Man. So that was the first enemy that was put in the game, was the doppelganger. Because once it's explained or shown through the game that this is just a reflection or a shadow of yourself, then it's logical that all the animations are the same, that the character looks the same and reacts the same, because it is you, just a shadowy version of you. That's how he finally got combat into the game. Later on, he did some rejiggering of the code and freed up 12K of memory. So at that point, he had enough to put guards in as well, which have much more limited animations and are basically restricted to having sword fighting animations. Those do come in later, but the first way he solved it was the Shadow Man. Then he saved some memory, and he added some guards as well. So this required another round of rotoscoping, because now he's got combat in the game. He hadn't had enemies or combat before, so he hadn't created any animations for that. So this time, a lot of the animations, I think, are done by his friend and fellow game designer, Robert Cook, another guy, I think I mentioned him earlier, but another guy doing games for Broderbund. They look at some of the classic old movies, particularly Errol Flynn movies like Captain Blood and Robin Hood. Finally, he digitizes the sword fight, the classic sword fight, between Errol Flynn as Robin Hood and Basil Rathbone as the guy of Gisborne in the classic 1930s Robin Hood movie. Basically, the frames for his sword fighting are taken right out of frames from that sword fight.
Now, here's what I have to really ask. Does he speak with an English accent?
Unlike some Robin Hoods, yes. That solved one problem, but then he still had another problem that took him through the rest of 1988, which was that the game wasn't fun. He was pretty confident that getting combat in was going to solve some of the fun problem, but he had these big interconnected spaces, kind of like Castles of Dr. Creep had, with very little direction to them, and you're just kind of having to run around all over this place and vaguely solve puzzles, avoid traps, but there's not much of a direction to it. As Tomy put it, who continues to be one of his muses, on November 11th, 1988, your game has no rewards except getting to the next level. It's all survival and no triumph. He realizes that he's right about that. There's really no goal to overcome. I mean, yes, you're going to rescue a princess, you're going to rescue the girl at the end, but that's not enough. There's really nothing to keep you going. It's very aimless because it's this, as he puts it, free-floating random access area. Like there's 24 screens per level, and they're not really linked together in any kind of way. Random access, I don't know that that means that it changes every time you play it, but free floating definitely means that you might be going all over the level trying to figure out where to go next, what to do. It's not focused. And of course, there's no enemies yet. I mean, that's going to help change things as well, but there's no enemies yet. He realized that he really should link things sequentially instead, which would make it more similar to Karateka. Instead of freeform, obstacles to overcome one after another. From the same post, November 11th, he says, like, a chasm that has to be jumped, a gate that has to be raised, a guard that has to be killed. So he scales it down, and he decides, I'll have just a small series of levels. Well, at first he thought it was going to be a large series of levels. He thought he was going to have 4 castles of 10 levels each, or 5 castles, actually, of 10 levels each, to get like 50 levels. Spoiler alert, the final game has 12 levels. He originally got grandiose, but I don't think there was time to get grandiose because it's 1988 and he has to hit that Apple II market before it dies. That eventually scales back, but he decides that there need to be distinct levels and there needs to be progression through the levels. You're on these individual screens, and there's going to be a clearly defined goal on each screen to get to the next screen. He realizes it needs that sense of progression to be fun. So he does that, and it starts feeling a little better. In his own words, it's still not enough. He even says that. Very next day, November 12th, 1988, still not enough. As he says it, the princess waiting at the end is a reward only in the story. We need rewards in the game, like beating a guard in Karateka. What makes a game fun? Tension release, tension release. Prince of Persia has neither. It's like going on a 25-mile hike. Every now and then you get to step over a log or cross a stream. Big deal. It's just languid is the problem. And, you know, this shows, too, he kind of understands game design. He needs sub-goals, as he says. There needs to be sub-goals, places where you can say, phew, I did it. That was a tough one. What's next? And then he gives examples. He is a student of game design, as we talked about in the last one. He analyzes the games that he plays to see what makes them fun. Clearing a screen in Asteroids or Pac-Man. Beating a guard in Karateka. Solving a level in Lode Runner. These are sub-goals that keep you going on the overarching goal, and Prince of Persia doesn't have that. Structuring the level is going to do some of that. So he's going to have a solving the level kind of sub-goal. He's going to bring that into focus. But he also realizes, because he thinks about this for several days, he decides that what's really missing is an opponent. Yeah, there's a vizier that's imprisoning a princess, but that's all story, as he puts it. There's no opponent in the game. Like at the end, you make it through all of these puzzles and you rescue the princess. There's no final obstacle to overcome. You need a villain. You need a Bowser. You need a Dr. Robotnik. You need someone that is doing this thing that you can confront at the end of the game, and the vizier is not that. Finally, he realizes that he's limited on time, so he decides the perfect antagonist is the Shadow Man. He doesn't really have time to create a new antagonist, but he's already created the Shadow Man. Now he decides that the Shadow Man is going to be that antagonist. So he places him throughout the story. After he appears in that mirror, he appears from time to time. Sometimes he sabotages the player by taking a potion or opening a pit, in a couple of set places. And then at the end of the game, you have to fight him and reabsorb him in order to rescue the princess. So that was kind of the final key element that he got in at the end of 1988. Once he figured that out, once he figured out the progression, the opponent, and just got the combat in, because it took him a while to get everything rotoscoped and get that all implemented. Finally, by the end of 1988, he felt like he had a fun game. We have the game that we got, where there's a series of 12 levels. Each of those levels consists of a series of rooms. Each of those rooms has a series of puzzles to solve, plates to step on, gates to open, traps to avoid, sometimes guards to fight. You make your way through all of those levels. Partway through, the Shadow Man is unleashed and starts pursuing you. You collect items like potions and stuff on the way as well. And then finally, at the very end, you defeat the Shadow Man, reabsorb him, and then rescue the princess. All done with stunning animation of the character running, jumping, climbing, sword fighting, etc. Game development continues through most of 1989. There's still other things to finish up, including a closing cinematic of rescuing the princess, where he again filmed real actors. The 18-year-old daughter of a Broderbund employee and another person that he knew at the company filled in on those roles. There were a few things to do. There was testing to do, tweaking to do, but that was kind of the last hurdle. It's finally released in 1989, and initially it's just kind of, because it's too late. The Apple II market's dead. There is an IBM PC port released kind of a little bit afterwards, and it also just doesn't do very much. Broderbund persists a little bit, and they put it out on more and more platforms. It gets a little bit of energy in Europe when it's ported to some of the platforms that are heavily used over there, like the Commodore Amiga. It gets ported to some of the Nintendo systems and gets a little juice there as well. But the big turning point is the Mac release, of all things. We don't really think of the Mac as a game machine.
Apple Macintosh, like the original.
Not the original, because it's no longer 1984, but yes, the Apple Macintosh.
GUI and everything. Oh dear.
Here's the thing. The Mac is not much of a gaming machine, but he contracted with a friend of his at a little company called Presage Software to do the Mac port in 1989, with the thought that it would come out pretty soon after. I think the PC port came out in 1990, and I think the idea is probably the Mac port would come out around then too. But this happened to be a period of time when the Mac underwent a lot of changes in its display, in the capabilities of the display, the resolution of the display, everything else. Because this was such a groundbreaking game with groundbreaking animation and all of that stuff, the developer really wanted to take advantage of all of those features. So every time that the Mac was getting revised, they would revise their port to take advantage of the latest features of the Macintosh. So this delayed the game until 1992 on the Macintosh. I think that did two things. First of all, even though the Macintosh was not that much of a game machine, that actually worked in its favor, because whoever did own a Mac and really wanted to play games on it were really starved for games by this point. By 1992, there were enough of those people that when this game came out on the Macintosh, they were like, oh my God, a game to play on the Macintosh and it's pretty good. We have to buy that. So it started doing good business on the Macintosh. The other thing is, 1982 is the year Aladdin came out. I don't think it's a coincidence that Prince of Persia suddenly sprang to life the year that Disney's Aladdin came out.
The vizier is Jafar. It would seem to be, for every Arabian tale, is the default bad guy, along with, if there's a vizier, you're always a scheming megalomaniac.
Indeed. They did the Mac release, but they also, taking advantage of the fact that it was coming out on the Mac, they decided to do a fresh re-release on PC as well. It's kind of funny. Both Jordan Mechner and one of the marketing people at the company at Broderbund at the time, Susan Lee Marrow, kind of independently take credit for this, like without the other really being involved. So I don't know exactly where the truth is. They decided to take advantage of this to re-release on PC as well and put it in a very distinctive box. Not a typical boring square box, but this kind of really funky box. It kind of hourglass shaped. It's not symmetrical like an hourglass, and it's not rounded like an hourglass, but it's kind of got this big part up top, and then it cuts down to a thinner middle, and then zooms back out to the base again, so kind of an hourglass-like design. The way Susan Lee Marrow put it in an interview that I did with her, she was kind of perplexed why the game had not sold well when it had won so many awards, because it was critically acclaimed and wasn't selling. She thought for the re-release they should change the packaging and give it something exciting and interesting that would draw the eye in the store. Broderbund would not normally do that for a re-release of a game, but she kind of persisted, and they did it that way. That's Susan Lee Marrow's version of it. Jordan Mechner just kind of says we were re-releasing and thought it would be great to have a different box. So who knows? But the point is, they also re-released it on PC at that time, and those sales took off. Prince of Persia was a bona fide mega hit that ended up across all platforms, which includes console platforms, so not just on computer platforms. It would go on to sell several million copies. It gave Jordan Mechner a boatload of royalties, and it gave him the financial security to continue on to the next phase of his life journey, which we will no doubt pick up sometime in the future on They Create Worlds, but not immediately. That is where we will leave Jordan Mechner and his journals for now, after our very in-depth looks at the making of Karateka and the making of Prince of Persia.
Did Jordan give any thoughts about how the video game industry changed at this point, where he just was really thankful that he stuck with video games and didn't end up actually going into the movies?
I think he was obviously happy that he stuck with it, and he does start work even before Prince of Persia finally becomes a hit in 1992. He does start work on a sequel, Prince of Persia 2, which is released. I mean, when I say start work, there is a sequel. I think it's fair to say, though, that his movie ambitions had never quite left him, and those ambitions started to awaken in him again once he had the financial security that Prince of Persia being a success gave him. Flashing way forward to near the end of the journal, December 8th, 1992, moving near the end of this entry, he says, "My original plan was to turn Prince of Persia into a franchise so I could live off the royalties and write screenplays and make movies. I've done that. I know if I went to LA now, I could get into that business. But I've changed my mind because now that I've seen the movie business, I think this is actually more interesting. There's a lot of people out there making movies, but if I don't do this adventure game, no one will. It's a chance to change the course of a whole new art form. I don't even like adventure games, but I'm going to like this one. This will be the first adventure game since Scott Adams that I'll actually like." Of course, what he is talking about when he says this is the game that will ultimately become The Last Express. So, yes, to answer your question, while the movie thing isn't going to entirely go away and he's going to revisit it much later in his life again, he is definitely now feels like this is his place. Video games are a thing that he can do. Video games are actually an exciting medium, and I am going to take storytelling to the next level with a new kind of adventure game, the likes of which no one has ever seen. Which I'm sure will be the subject of another episode of They Create Worlds somewhere down the line that you can move right to after this one to continue the story. But for now, we will leave the story of The Last Express alone.
We have rescued the princess, or maybe we rescued the research and the history. We have rescued the history. We're a history podcast, so we're going to rescue the history.
Sure, we can do that.
Who else are we going to rescue in our next episode and learn more about them?
Well, Jeffrey, I think it's time to return to the middle of the 1990s PC scene and take up once again with a group of people that we have talked about on and off over the years on the show, those people being the good folks at id Software. We've done an overview of id Software as a whole. We've done a really deep dive into Doom. And now I think it's time to do a deep dive into their next seminal product following Doom, that being Quake.
3D Doom.
Indeed.
Well, kids, get your mice, your keyboard, and your cheat codes ready, because we're going to have us a LAN party. Next time on They Create World. Check out our show notes at podcast.theycreateworlds.com, where we have links to some of the things that we discussed in this and other episodes. You can check out Alex's video game history blog at videogamehistorian.wordpress.com. Alex's book, They Create Worlds, the story of the people and companies that shaped the video game industry, Volume 1, can now be ordered through CRC Press and at major online retailers. Feel free to email us at feedback@theycreateworlds.com. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/theycreateworlds. If you do sign up, please do so through the website and not through the iOS app. This saves you from the 30% Apple markup. We understand that you may not be able to financially support us, but you can still support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcasting service that you use. We now have the podcast available on YouTube. Please like and subscribe. Intro music is Airplane Mode by Josh Woodward, found at joshwoodward.com/song/airplane mode, used under a Creative Commons Attribution license. Outro music is Bacterial Love by Roll Music, found at freemusicarchive.org, used under a Creative Commons Attribution license. Looks like they added color to this version.
No, it was originally in color.
38? Wow.
Yeah?
Damn.
I loved that movie as a kid. I watched it over and over and over again.
That's what you're thinking of, right?
Absolutely it is. I don't even have to start playing it.
You can
I
tell from the first
just tell by seeing Errol Flynn there on the screen. That is definitely the one.